In an era that was dominated by attackers like Eusebio, Puskas, and Pele, one goalkeeper managed to stand out from the crowd of attackers, and that was none other than Lev Yashin. Lev Yashin is considered by many as the best keeper of all time because of the way he revolutionized the sport, with him adopting the sweeper keeper role with his fearlessness to come off the line to intercept crosses and diving at attackers' feet in order to start quick counterattacks. And he did this all at a time where keepers were expected to sit back in goal and only focus on saving shots as a keeper, whereas Yashin was a multifaceted keeper that is more similar to the goalkeepers in modern times. He really changed how the goalkeeper position was looked at going forward, as his playing style would influence plenty of goalkeepers that came after him to punch balls instead of trying to catch them, come out of the penalty area to catch attackers off guard, and lead and command defenses. Not only that, but he also possessed some insane athleticism and reflexes that allowed him to make acrobatic saves that wasn't seen anywhere else at the time, which just goes to show you how far ahead of his time he really was. It was this insane athleticism and reflexes that allowed him to save over 150 penalties throughout his career, which is a record that still stands to this day, with the next person on the list, Handanovic, only having saved 38 penalties in comparison. However, if you dig beyond Yashin's skills and playing style, you would see a man that was hailed a national hero, not only for his accomplishments from football, but rather his humility and humbleness that came even with the tragedies he had to deal with in his life. Yashin will be born in an unfortunate time in history, as he was born in the Soviet Union on 1929, and in his own words, he would say he had his childhood ended by the age of 11, as he and his family had to evacuate from his hometown Moscow, as Germany had surrounded St. Petersburg and were quickly moving towards Moscow. He and his family would end up in a city called Ulyanovsk, and here he would work in an ammunition factory by the age of 13 to help his country's efforts to survive the invasion. And this would also end up birthing his footballing career, as he would play for the factory's footballing team as the team's goalkeeper. Yashin would continue to juggle working in the ammunition factory and also playing as the factory team's goalkeeper until he turned 18, when he suffered a nervous breakdown that resulted in him quitting work and also quitting football altogether. When writing about this time years later, Yashin would write, "Was it depression? I don't know. The fatigue accumulated over the years began to make itself felt, and something in me suddenly broke. At that time, I felt nothing except emptiness." After suffering the nervous breakdown, his friend and his longtime teammate at the factory suggested him to join the military services for Yashin to try to find purpose again. This advice proved to be life-changing for Yashin, as Yashin would rediscover his love for football again in the military, and here he would start taking the sport a lot more serious than he had back when he was working in the factory. Him working hard to train for football eventually paid off, as a youth coach for the Dynamo Moscow team called Arkady Cheryshev would soon discover Yashin and sign him for the team. Yashin would get fast-tracked to the first team, and he would make his debut in 1950 in a friendly match, but his debut proved to be disappointing for Yashin, as he would concede a goal that should have been easily saved. And after this performance, he would go on to make 2 more appearances throughout the season. But after this year, he would be stuck on the bench for good, behind the team's starting keeper Alexei Komich. While he was stuck on the bench in the footballing pitch, he would instead get game time playing for the Dynamo Moscow's hockey team as the starting goalkeeper. And he would even go on to win the Soviet Cup in 1952, which is insane to think about, because playing in the Soviet League was no joke, as some of the best hockey players in the world at the time were Soviet players playing in the Soviet League. But here was Yashin, who mostly dedicated his youth training for football, showing up and competing with the best of the best hockey had to offer. His hockey career though ultimately came to an end shortly after he won the Soviet Cup, as he would get another chance to start as the goalkeeper in the Dynamo Moscow's football team, which led to Yashin quitting hockey to put his entire effort into football. When he came back to the Dynamo Moscow's footballing team, he would look like a whole different player than the performance he showed at the start of his career, as he pulled off some incredible saves that quickly earned him the nickname the Black Spider, for his usual style of wearing all black and also making saves that seemed only possible if he had 8 legs, just like a spider. Yashin's strong performance in the league earned him the distinction of #1 keeper for the Soviet national team, and by 1956 he would represent the national team in the Olympics. In the Olympics, the Soviet Union took on Germany in the first round, where they beat them 2-1 to move on to the second round, where they would play 2 games against Indonesia, as the first game ended in a 0-0 draw, with the second game ending in a 4-0 victory, as Yashin refused to let in a goal in both games. In the semi-finals, Yashin and the Soviet Union would face Bulgaria, and this game would stay scoreless until Bulgaria broke through in the 95th minute. but Soviet Union would rescue the game as they scored back-to-back goals in the 112th and the 116th minute to get a chance to play for the gold medal. In the finals, they would go against a strong Yugoslavian side who had a lot of chances to score, but were unable to capitalize on any of them, as Yashin was absolutely incredible in this match, making saves left and right, as the Soviets would end up scoring in the 48th minute to win the gold medal for the country. After this performance, he would continue to put up some incredible performances in the Soviet League, and while his Olympic performance combined with the successive incredible performances in the league made him well known throughout his country, it wasn't until 1958 World Cup that he started getting recognition from all over the footballing world. In this World Cup, the Soviet Union would be placed in a very tough group as they would have to compete with Brazil and England to try to make it out of the group. Soviets' group stage game against Brazil saw them taking on a Brazil side that had two all-time great attackers like Pele and Garrincha, and the game would turn out as you would expect, with Brazil getting plenty of chances left and right, but Yashin's heroics kept the final scoreline respectable as the game ended 2-0 thanks to some of Yashin's all-important saves. By the end of the group stages, the Soviets earned themselves a second place in the groups as Yashin kept 2 clean sheets against Austria and England to help the Soviets win. As the Soviets moved past the groups, they faced the host nation Sweden in the quarterfinals, but unfortunately for Soviets, Yashin wouldn't be able to stop Sweden from scoring, as they won the game 2-0 with Sweden ultimately making it to the finals where they would lose to the champions Brazil. Even with the elimination though, Yashin's performance hadn't gone unnoticed, and as a result, he was named the World Cup All-Star team as a starting goalkeeper for his standout performance. Just 2 years later, another big tournament would come up for Yashin, this time the Euros, and here he would put up an all-time great performance, as he would only let 2 players score on him throughout the whole tournament, as the Soviet Union beat Yugoslavia yet again to win the first ever Euros. His Euros performance would help him get nominated for the Ballon d'Or that year, which he placed a very respectable 5th, but he would only improve his case with his spectacular performances in the Soviet League, as he had finished in improved 4th place in the following year for the Ballon d'Or. After another 2 years, Yashin would return to the tournament where he first made his mark, the World Cup. However, Yashin would be uncharacteristically off this tournament as he suffered 2 concussions in the same exact tournament, but Yashin's fighting spirit refused to let him sit out the whole World Cup, which might have been to the detriment of his career, as he would let in 2 very easy goals that Yashin should have been able to save to Chile in the quarterfinals as they lost 2-1 to get knocked out of the tournament. The only Russian account of the game would be done by a writer whose usual job would be to write about South American politics. And this same writer would paint Yashin as the sole scapegoat of Soviets' loss, never mentioning the 2 concussions Yashin had suffered. This write-up tarnished Yashin's name within the country, and when Yashin came back to his homeland, he was met with signs that read, "Yashin, retire," and "Time to get your pension," in the airport, and this hate would follow him home as he would find the windows of his home smashed, insulting messages being left in his car, and to top it all off, threatening letters would come through the mail. All this hate would see Yashin come very close to retiring, but he ultimately decided against so, and carried on playing, and this would be the greatest decision of his career, as the following year after the World Cup would be Yashin's very best. Yashin would participate in a very important game this year, the English FA's 100th anniversary match between England and the rest of the World 11, and in this match, he would be selected by the manager Fernando Rivera, who was the very same manager that knocked out Yashin out of the World Cup, to start the match to play for one half. His performance in the one half he played could only be described as Yashin-like, as he would consistently make outstanding saves to keep the game 0-0 heading into halftime, with the game ultimately ending in a 2-1 victory for England. Back in Moscow though, 2-1 or not, it didn't matter, as all that mattered to the Soviet citizens was that Yashin didn't allow a goal in the one half that he did play, and just like that, he restored his reputation among his countrymen. His match performance was not the only impressive thing to come out of Yashin that year though, as he would lead Dynamo Moscow to a dominant league title run, as he would only concede an absurd 7 goals in 27 games. Yashin's triumphs throughout the whole year saw him accomplishing what no goalkeeper had done or even had done to this day, which is to win the Ballon d'Or, as he managed to win the Ballon d'Or just 1 year after many called for him to retire from the sport. And after that, Yashin's one last showing in the world stage would come 3 years later in the World Cup, as he would lead the Soviet Union to its highest ever finish as they finished 4th place in the tournament. His career would see him playing 4 more years after this tournament, with him ultimately retiring from football in 1970 as the most decorated goalkeeper of all time. By the end of his career, Yashin would win 9 European Goalkeeper of the Year awards, be placed in the FIFA Team of the Century and Dream Team, also named in the 2020 Ballon d'Or Dream Team, and winning an Olympic gold medal along with the first ever Euros. And of course, who could forget, he also won the Ballon d'Or. Yashin's impact to the sport though went far beyond his accolades, and I think Eusebio's quote on him perfectly summarized him, so I'll leave the video on his quote, in which he said, "Yashin was the peerless goalkeeper of the century."